Hello and welcome back to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. Our guest this week, Shashank, is a data analyst at Nordstrom. And what he talks through in this episode is his transition from a chemistry major into the analytics space. And it is just chock full of actionable advice for anyone who's trying to make the transition from any other industry into the analytics space. Then for the interactive portion of this podcast episode, we have Molly Welsh come back on, and she has some fantastic news. She just landed her first data science job, and she is pivoting out of a completely unrelated field to analytics. So Shashank and Molly talk through her transition, and then also he gives her some thoughts on how she can continue to grow. Then we round out the episode with our social media manager, Al Bellamy, who facilitates the questions that our audience has submitted through LinkedIn. If you're new to the podcast, you should go over to LinkedIn and type up How to Get an Analytics Job. There you can find our webpage where you can actively participate in upcoming episodes by submitting questions ahead of time for our analytics expert that's coming on the podcast that week. This podcast is brought to you by Panoply. Panoply is a platform that allows you to connect to 60 different data sources, where you can study your data in SQL, you can visualize it in tools like Power BI or Tableau, or even analyze it in your favorite programming language. Click the link in the description down below, and you can get a free 14-day trial to panoply.io. Also, if you're getting value out of the podcast, the best thing that you can do is like the video, leave a comment in the comment section down below, or even share this on social media. And if you're getting value out of the podcast, you should also subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so that you'll be notified on upcoming podcast episodes. With all that being said, let's jump into the podcast episode. Shashank, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, I lost my headphones, so I was a little bit late to the call, so I really apologize for that. The first time of season 2, so it's been, I think this is the 18th episode, first time I've been late to one of these podcasts, so that's not a bad batting average.
It's a pretty good hit rate, yeah.
So, okay, what we're going to be talking about today is your transition into the analytics space. And our guest for this week is Molly, and we've got some awesome news as kind of to update last week's episode where she came on as well. So I guess let's kind of start off the podcast episode of what was your journey getting into the analytics space? Because I know that you did not get a degree in data science or analytics or anything like that, right?
Correct. So yes, so as you can, I don't know if you can see from my shirt over here, I graduated from Emory University with a degree in chemistry. And when I joined the university, I was originally, pre-med and was like, you know what, I'm going to become a doctor, like half of the freshman class at the time. And what happened was, I finally realized I didn't really have much of a passion for chemistry, and I didn't really want to pursue a career in the natural sciences personally. And so when I graduated, no job, had no idea what I was doing, and was super lucky to get an internship at a company called Interstate Batteries, which is, I believe, the largest distributor of lead acid batteries in North America. So like the car batteries, basically. And in that internship, I was placed in IT. And they didn't really give me much work, and I, just couldn't stand the work in IT. I didn't really want to work with like ERP systems and stuff like that. So prior to that, I'd actually taken a supply chain course on EDX, and so I went to the 6th floor of the building because they'd given me no work in IT, and which is where supply chain was. And I started asking around. I'm like, hey guys, like, do you guys have any work for me? Like, IT's not giving me any work, and supply chain seems pretty cool. Eventually, I found a team that took pity on me and then gave me a stack of business cards, and we're like, okay, we need these like put into an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm like, okay, cool. That's some work. That's something for me to like do. Because otherwise I would just like come in and like sit for like 8 hours a day and do nothing. It was incredibly boring. So, put all the cards inside. And then a director luckily just happened to notice that I'd done that and then suggested me to another director and said, hey, this might be someone you want to hire. And that was the director that hired me into the analytics team, which they were just forming at Interstate. And so I was hired into the analytics team, no skills, just a willingness to work. And my manager, luckily, so he was like 26 at the time, so he was pretty young too. He was getting into data science himself. And he told me, okay, we have these two tools. We have a tool called Alteryx and we have a tool called Tableau. Now, for those of you that don't know, Alteryx is basically a data munging tool, a data wrangling tool that you can use to kind of as a step in for Python. It's like a no-code version of Python. And then Tableau is a BI tool, a business intelligence tool, basically meaning that you can use it to like, make visualizations and stuff. It's a competitor for Power BI. And so, just started picking up these tools. These tools are meant to be easy to use. And luckily through that, I was able to learn a lot of like the thought process behind working with data. And after that, I learned both those tools, and that's how I got into the analytics space.
Okay, cool. All right. So that was a pretty smooth transition. So you were able to do it intra company. So within that same organization, you got that.
Correct.
And then, which is something else I wanted to talk about too. So you got that first analytics job, and then now currently you work in a different company, right?
Yes. So I'm a data analyst level 3, which is kind of like a senior data analyst at Nordstrom. And I work with corporate analytics or strategic analytics. We just rebranded.
Okay, so that's something I wanted to kind of touch on is not only how do you make that transition, but then what does it look like once you're on the other side of like growing your career? But before we get to that, what I think you've described, or what I've been telling my students at High Point in Greensboro College, is that you hit that quarter life crisis, which I think is a new phenomenon for probably most people who go through college. Like there seems to be somewhat of a disconnect between what colleges are teaching or preparing people for and then the job market. I mean, obviously not in every single, like if you get a degree in analytics, I think it does a pretty good job of kind of lining you up. But if you study like science, it's like, well, how does that kind of map into the business world unless you're working in a lab? I mean, how did you feel so number one, it sounded like you were bored out of your mind. And then number two, you were taking on like, I mean, like literally looking at a card and typing it into Excel. I mean, what was that like for, I guess, day in and day out? Like, how did you cope with that?
I think for me, it was, so I was lucky and unlucky, I'd say. I had kind of just been slogging it out, like trying to get this chemistry degree, and I hated the subject, could not stand it. So the fact that someone willing to pay me to do something, instead of me paying, in my situation, me paying a university to do something I didn't like, that was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm getting paid to do something. And so I think for me, that was like a big source of the inspiration. It was really just, I was just thankful to be paid for anything at that point. And I had been applying quite regularly to get into jobs, really didn't get into anything. So I was really lucky that Interstate decided to hire me at that point. So I think it was very much a mindset thing that was formed by the situation I had earlier, where I was like, okay, you know what? Like, if I just show them I'm working, I'll get like, someone will notice it somewhere. And that's where I would say I was just very lucky that a director happened to notice the work I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. And I think this theme keeps coming up over and over. Early on in your career, or early on with anything, the main thing you need to prioritize is hustle.
Yes.
Like just turn
Yes.
over enough rocks, and you're going to find something interesting. Then you get to a period in your career where it shifts, and this is the phase that I'm kind of finding myself in now, where I shouldn't hustle. In fact, what I do when I'm stressed is I work extra hard to self-soothe, which really that's a bad tactic because later in your career, it's more about judgment, less about kind of the volume of work that you're doing.
Right.
Which is something that I'm kind of like struggling with a little bit myself of like, I will have downtime and I don't know what to do with that. And I want to immediately fill it with work, which a lot of times it's, I don't know, just busy work. It's not, it's more about feeling better and feeling productive than actually doing kind of the tough work. So what happened after you got that? So what was your first title in, was it just Analytics 1 or Analyst 1?
Business analyst. That's what that was the title I got. I was really a data analyst, less of a business analyst. But I was given the title of business analyst because I wasn't like communicating requirements to a development team. I was taking in requirements myself and building analytic products out of it.
Okay.
So it was really much closer to a data analyst, but the title was business analyst.
And then how did you go? Did you get another promotion within that company, or did you go directly to Nordstrom after that?
So I got another promotion within Interstate Batteries. They, saw the hours I was putting in. So in that first job, I would put in like 60-hour weeks quite consistently, because at that point, I would say one source of inspiration was I felt like I knew nothing, which is probably a very fair, judgment of my skills at the time, because I graduated with a chemistry degree, which didn't really, and it's not the fault of the university. It's that, I should have, picked a different degree, but the degree really did not prepare me for the workforce or for the work I'd be doing, because it was all computational. It was all business. It was all supply chain. Like, I really couldn't link my degree to what I was doing there. So I was willing to put in those hours because I'm like, okay, a lot of my friends, they got their degrees in like finance, XYZ careers, and now they're doing that in the workplace. And so they got this head start over here. So I need to like work extra hard just to, catch up to everyone. What I personally thought was a healthy source of competition, but for some other people might be very stressful. And so, yeah, I think that's what I did at Interstate. And then I went to CSC ServiceWorks after that as a senior data analyst. So someone from Interstate that I knew, really smart guy, he became a director and eventually a VP at CSC ServiceWorks, and then asked me to join him. And this was actually another interesting like jump in my career, because I'm like, okay, like getting that senior data analyst title and like being asked to like put out independent work without like a direct manager, because he was a VP, he didn't have time to like manage me. That was a really big mental shift for me, because now I'm no longer a junior. I'm no longer being told, okay, here's like the, outline of work, go do this thing. It's like, here's the problem, go solve that, figure out how you're going to solve it. And through that job is actually where I picked up Python and SQL, because Alteryx, tremendous tool. It's $6,000 per year per license.
Wow.
Very expensive. I don't think the price is bad, depending on who you give it to. But I could just learn Python, which is free and open source. And I'm no longer tied to companies that use Alteryx, which in my experience are relatively few. In my recent job search, the only company I saw that was using Alteryx was Ford. Everyone else is like, no, just learn Python. And so that's where I learned Python and SQL. That way I could like expand my skill set and be a lot more useful to more employers. And that'll happen in my second job. So my second job is kind of like where my mind shifted from, I'm no longer a junior, I'm a senior, I'm expected to do my own work.
Right. And that also seems to map onto kind of that theory of what's funny about this podcast is like people are watching me think like I'm an extrovert, and this is how I think out loud. So I just throw ideas out. And it seems like that kind of that paradigm, that mental model of hustle, then you get to a point where you have enough success momentum to where it's like your judgment. So
correct.
So it sounds like for you, that vector point, that point where it like kind of changed was you got that senior role, and all of a sudden now you're solving problems, which is a completely different thing than here, go do this task. Like I need you to, what were the tasks that you had to do in those entry level jobs, other than, it sounds like it got upgraded from type things to Excel.
So yeah, the Excel thing was that was only during the internship. When in my actual job, they had me kind of like what I would call like a BI engineer would probably be a good term for that. I would use Alteryx. So I didn't know how to code back then. So I would use Alteryx to plug into the data lake, and I didn't even know SQL back then. So I'd use Alteryx to plug into our data lake, pull in data, and then manipulate it, and then export it to a Tableau hyperfile, which then I would build a BI dashboard on top of. And this was very useful because a lot of our executives never had visibility into what our company was doing. And this is a point I really wanted to make on this podcast. It was a huge discovery for me that like when you read about data science, when you read about analytics, you're only reading about the stuff that makes it onto Hacker News, or reading about the stuff that makes it onto like, CNN or something about like, oh, Facebook has like a super mega duper AI that can do everything. 99% of companies are nowhere near that. And I think it can be very intimidating when you think about, oh no, how am I supposed to like, operate at this level of like what these companies are doing. Most American companies, most companies in the world, I doubt, are doing anything like that. And they need BI. They need people to build them dashboards. They need people to pipe data from here to here. Like that's difficult. That needs to be done by someone. And that's where I would say there's tremendous opportunity for many people. Even a company like Nordstrom needs that, it's a large-ish, well-run company, and even they need people to pipe data from here to here and build dashboards and stuff.
Well, it's been my experience that the larger the company, the messier that is,
Mhm.
Therefore, there's even more job security because like the clients that I'm taking on at Silvertone Analytics, it's very simple, very small. I can basically automate the entire thing.
Yes.
Um, but I think there's a huge opportunity in that medium to large company size space where, I mean, you have more experience in that space than I do. I mean, I had one internship at a $12 billion or two internships at a huge company, but it didn't work. I do not like that environment, but it sounds like there's a huge amount of growth and it's a pretty stable kind of job perspective in the future.
100%. And I think I would actually say the companies I'm talking about are more like 5 billion and under in revenue.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's your interstates, your CSCs. These are companies that are operating in legacy industries and only now have the infrastructure necessary to build out like proper analytics implementations. Because what they used to do, a lot of them, was that they would just have all their data sitting in an ERP system. But because of the revolution in cloud, ERP systems, a lot of them are built on like these really slow databases that like are hard to get data out of. Like you have to get extracts and stuff out of them. It's not fun.
Do you wait? So, okay, this is a totally personal question, side tangent. For one of my clients, I have to do 4 different extracts and I have to do them every 2 weeks to update a dashboard. There's no way that I can like pay someone to write a script to automate that. Like you have to manually do that, right?
You probably could pay so. Well, it depends on the system. But depending on the ERP system, right? Some of them have their own thing where they will export the CSV into a shared folder, which then you can have a Python script just grab for you and do whatever you need to. You just have to spin up a Linux server and run what's called a cron job, which basically means that it'll like run something at whatever interval you define. Or if you have cloud solutions, then like, for sure that stuff can be pulled automatically. There are a couple of things you can use to pull that data automatically,
Okay.
depending on the system.
Interesting. Sorry.
Yes.
So total side tangent. I've been doing that for 5 years now. Every 2 weeks, having to like just, but we can talk about that more off air. So, okay. So you were talking about, wait, what were you talking about? You're talking about the ERP systems.
Yes. So I guess the point I'm trying to communicate to people, right, is that until I got into corporate America, right, and I was lucky, in my opinion, I was very lucky not to get into like some mega corporation like EY or like McKinsey or some other like Apple or Facebook, like these companies with like very well established data pipelines. I'm sure they need BI work done too, but like I'm willing to bet that Apple has like, a lot of their BI work already handled by engineers. Working at a company like Interstate, I was able to see, okay, like when the data exists over here, someone has to like clean all of that and understand all the intricacies with it and get it ready before we can put it into a Tableau dashboard. And there are so many 5 billion revenue and under companies in America. And the point I'm trying to make is that this is a job that an entry-level person could totally learn. Like the stuff I do at Nordstrom right now, right out of college, I think someone would have trouble, like just like, picking it up and doing it. Like I think some particularly talented people could totally do it, but and there are companies that don't even hire entry level for like analyst roles because they're like, okay, no, we have all the entry level stuff taken care of, so we don't even hire that. So I think if you are looking for a job, I would highly suggest looking at 5 billion and under companies, because not only is there a lot of opportunity over there, there's a ton to learn because you actually have to plug into the system directly. You have to go to the source data directly. And they even at Interstate, we had this like one system that was like 200 access databases tied together. That is totally something an entry-level person that, with some moxie could like automate if they kind of like know where to look. Okay, Python, Alteryx, like what tools do I look into automating this kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, it seems like the sense that I'm getting out of the people who are leaving questions and comments on the podcast is that they feel like they need to come out of college locked and loaded with certifications and tools, and that's going to be what gets them the job. What would you say is if you were hiring? And well, are you in a position where you're hiring yet, or I guess you're a senior?
I interview. So what happens is the hires are brought to me, and then I interview them.
Oh, perfect. So
Yeah.
you're the perfect person to ask this question. What impresses you or is not impressive about people who are coming directly out of college looking for their first analytics job?
So it's a tough balance, right? Because you have to be able to confidently talk, or at least, for me as an interviewer, and I have to preface this by saying I have a very specific style. I'm an extrovert. I like people that like can carry a conversation and I don't want to say keep me entertained, but kind of like, like where I'm not asking every single question of them.
Right.
You know,
Pass the ball back and forth, not just
right,
one,
right.
2 word answers, yes, no.
Exactly. So I would say, obviously someone who has technical skills is going to be impressive to me. Someone, if you know Python, you know SQL, okay, cool, that's less stuff I have to teach you. And we can just get you straight up on some stuff. If you don't though, like I didn't, when I started, I didn't have the technical skills at all. That is totally fine. What I'm looking more for is how easy is it to teach you something? Because I have never met an entry-level person, and I very much put myself in this bucket. I've never met an entry-level person that like you can throw them into corporate America in analytics. You can throw them into corporate America and they immediately know what they're doing. They are, kicking ass and like, taking names from day one. Like it's such a huge shift from the educational system and what the person's been doing for the 22 years prior in their life. That what I'm most looking for is like, okay, how easily can I teach you? How many hours are you willing to put in? Like, I'll respect your time, but you got to learn. So how many hours are you willing to put in? Which is a personal value of mine. Like a lot, like hours is a very personal value of mine. And what questions are you willing to ask? When they say we're looking for critical thinking skills, I didn't understand it until I got into corporate America. And I'm like, okay. Like, unlike school where there is this all-knowing person, the professor, who like gives you a problem, with this, which may or may not have a set solution. Obviously, every professor teaches differently, but like has a set solution. It's an engineered problem. In the workplace, you wouldn't be paid money if the problem was already solved. So,
wow, you know what? I am so glad you brought that up because that is. I just wrapped up this semester with the Capstone course where I had the students go and work on two of my clients. And these are novel problems that I don't have an out of the box solution to.
Right.
And what's interesting is I'm like, look, I've taught you Power BI and Tableau last semester. Here are the frameworks that I've taught you. Here's how to think about a KPI and a dimension of data. Go solve this. If you have questions, let me know, but I'm not gonna. At first I was like anxious and I wanted to spoon feed them everything of like, oh, this is what the client wants typically. And like, I realized like, no, I'm actually going to divorce myself from the interaction. You're the team leader, go interface with the client. And I think that was the most, I mean, I didn't even get that level of interaction and kind of, I guess it's how do you teach critical thinking? I think I didn't even get that in my MBA program. I mean, we did a capstone course, but it wasn't like, these weren't real problems that the company was actively like, hey, this is worth, I don't know, $50,000 to us if we can get this right.
Yeah, it's a tough, because if you think about it, like, like in many ways, what is the education system for a lot of people, right? It's not for everyone, but like, what is it for a lot of people? It is a system we have in society that is supposed to bring people to a certain level of knowledge to where they are able to, and I'm taking kind of like the very like, society level, take on it. They will be able to execute more economically viable tasks. We can have them do more advanced stuff for people. And especially in the age of the knowledge worker, which is like kind of the age we're in right now, right? You are not going to be given direct instructions on how to like accomplish stuff, because that stuff can just be given to a robot. RPA is totally a thing. Right. These tasks that can just be given to computers aren't going to be given to people anymore. So the real question, I think, is like, how well can you solve problems? And that's kind of why I place a very high emphasis on technical skills at the beginning of a career, because I think it's a very kind of like easy way to differentiate yourself from people. Like, yes, you can code. That's a skill. I can give it to you, and you can easily you can think of a solution to a problem, and then you can go create it. I don't have to give
mental models.
Yes,
it gives you models of like, okay, here's this specific problem. Here's how I would solve this with Python. Here's how I would solve it with Tableau. And it gives you like kind of like a little methodology to like solve I almost call them like little castles, little fiefdoms of like, here's this, because that's how I built my consulting agency. It's like, here's how I solve sales analytics. Here's how I solve marketing analytics. And then I package it up, and then I can go and I can communicate it to, president, CFOs, whoever, CMOs, whoever's like potentially interested in implementing analytics. What I think also too, what's coming to mind is this concept. Do you know what lateral thinking is?
No, I don't.
Okay, so lateral thinking is like kind of making, well, I think a lot of in terms of metaphors. So like when you were talking about, okay, I hire people, here are the things that are good, here are the things that are bad. It made me think of, I don't know if you've like ever played like a video game where it's like Tekken or they're fighting, and it's like you have your player selection screen, and it's like here's the person, here's technical skills, and it's like a bar there. Here's their personality, here's a bar there. It's like thinking about how you grade people for their interviews or how you perceive them. I was thinking like, oh, it's kind of like how I would choose my fighting character in a video game.
Yeah, I think that's actually a tremendous way of like thinking about it. Like certain characters have different abilities,
Right.
but you don't win. Assuming that you're not playing with a broken character, right? You don't win a game by just mashing the buttons and randomly just like throwing like Python, Tableau, Power BI at like the problem. You're like, okay, no. You know how to do these things. And what I'm looking for is how do you implement these different moves, these different things you know to solve the problem? Because like I said, I think from my first job to my second job, I was doing a lot of the same work, but I was using Python instead of Alteryx to get the job done. But there's more than one way to get the job done. And if you use a tool like Alteryx, for example, you don't need to know coding at all. Or Tableau now released Tableau Prep a couple of years ago. They actually released in the middle of my like that first job I had.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's free software that comes with Tableau, like a Tableau desktop license. And you can accomplish a lot of stuff that would normally require Python or Power Query with Tableau Prep. And so I think you're exactly right. Like the fighting game metaphor is like a great way to think about it. Like you have your technicals, but how you apply them is really what makes you useful to people.
Right. I'm going way too deep into this metaphor. Because also I was thinking too, like people are just looking for the cheat codes. They want to like, what is this? What is the superpower that can just get you through this? But okay, so if we have like an attack stat and a defense stat, I would say maybe the attack stat would be like your technical acumen. Your defense stack might be your business acumen. So understanding like, okay, so I don't know that much about coding or Python, but maybe I can study marketing and learn kind of how to apply data and numbers and what is the game that's being played there. And then I can, in the background, start to build up that technical acumen.
And that's exactly what I did. I came in with some knowledge of supply chain, and I built the technical acumen on the job. I really have to emphasize that. Like a lot of this stuff can be built on the job. Just put in an hour or two after work, or even in work. If you're lucky enough to have a manager that allows you to take a little bit more time on tasks to try it in a different method. I would say put in the time in work if you can, or especially we're all working at home, right?
Right.
A lot of people probably have a little bit more flexibility with their time to go try the exact same problem they solve, but using a different system.
I do like that. Also, too, you're bringing up this concept called the unfair advantage.
So yeah. I've heard of the book.
So all the interviewees who come to you have different life experiences, and to kind of piggyback on Molly. So Molly, our guest, I guess you are now part of the podcast family. We've taken you, and you're part of the lore here.
Thank you.
So Molly, well, first of all, I don't want to steal your thunder. What's the news you have for this week?
Well, the news I have for this week, I guess if anybody watched last week's episode, the interviews went successful, and I was offered a job the same day of my interview. So I had my first and my second, and when I got out of my second, I had a voicemail from the first.
Okay.
That's huge. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But okay, the point that I wanted to loop Molly in on this specific point was that the unfair advantage is that, Molly, you have a degree where you study GIS, you understand geography. That is very much relevant to. So number one, tell us your job title, and then what is kind of the work that you're going to be doing?
So the job title is as a data scientist, and the work that I'm doing is multifaceted from what I understand, but basically risk analysis for natural disaster recovery. So the tools I'll be using is some data visualization. They mentioned Tableau, SQL, Python, and GIS. I think that's kind of what made me stand out, because they have a GIS team, but they were mentioning how it's really difficult they stay really busy. So it's nice to have somebody else that understands the software.
Nice. Have you ever used Esri, by the way?
Esri, that doesn't sound familiar. Like the Aries software?
Yes. Yeah, like
Okay.
the GIS software.
Yeah, so ArcGIS, ArcMaps, and ArcView are what I have experience in.
Okay, so Shashank, I keep wanting to say Shashank, right? For those of you guys who are listening, we were talking off air. I grew up with someone named Shashank, and I keep seeing his name, and I want to pronounce it that way. So Shashank, do you see where I was going there with like what is Molly's unfair advantage when applying for that specific job?
I would say the unfair advantage is, like how many geology people are there that know how to use Tableau and Power BI and these other tools. I would say it's the unfair advantage is usually a combination of like two things I see. So no, you're like geology knowledge with the fact that you know Tableau, or like, and I think something that might be relatable to other people. My unfair advantage when I started, like I didn't have any of, like the, my unfair advantage was kind of, I'd say, just the willingness to put in 12-hour days, because I was like, I need to like move up. I need to move up because, most people aren't willing to put in those days, and that's totally fine. Like people have other stuff to worry about. They have like, they have to take care of life and everything. But I was living at my parents' house, so I could, just put in those hours and do what I needed to do to move up. So I think everyone has an unfair advantage. And for some people, it's like it's a subject matter expertise in the case of Molly. And then, I'd say back then for me, it was I want to say desperation, really, to be better. That's really what it was. It was desperation to be better, and to do better, because I'd spent 4 years in college and then kind of felt like I graduated with like, nothing that I'm going to be using.
I think you're selling yourself short, actually.
No, thank you.
I think that there's a unique unfair advantage that you have that it's something that we actually share. We both have this in common. Any guess?
Oof.
Putting you on the spot. I love this.
Okay.
Making people think.
Ooh, okay. So I would, if I had to guess, it would kind of be like unconventional, or an unconventional solution to analytics problems. I'm not really sure.
Okay. So what I see as one of my main unfair advantages is that what's funny is, depending on who you ask, I'm seen as technical. So if you ask the CEO or CMO or president of a company, I'm kind of a tech guy. According to you, like just hearing you talk about what you do, I don't have any technical knowledge. But being technical and extroverted is a pretty rare combination.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fact that you have a YouTube channel, which shout out, everybody go check out his channel. And it's about analytics, data science. There's a handful of people, I would say, on the entire earth who do that and do that consistently.
Right. It's actually funny that you mentioned that. Like I remember back at even at Interstate, I would prefer to go to happy hours with the marketing teams, because they just tend to be more extroverted people, and like their happy hours are crazy. So yeah, no, I totally see what you mean by that. I think, yeah, being able to advertise and teach and dynamically communicate insights that you have developed can be a major advantage in this space, because it is not what I would anecdotally, it's not what I would call a particularly common set of or a common personality characteristic.
Well, I would say it primes you for a leadership role.
True. Yeah.
Because that's kind of because I've been thinking through this a lot of like, well, okay, I'm a professor. I have an agency. I have the YouTube channel. Like I'm trying to make trying to make sense of it all. Like what is the so what about it? And I think it's that being an educator, you are leading people this is still kind of a nebulous thought I'm trying to kind of pull out. But if you can teach people things, then that is going to prime you for that kind of managerial role, which and getting out of. I think that, okay, showing hard work, showing that you can learn, finding that unique advantage will get you that entry level job.
That's just the entry level stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Then working really hard, having successes and wins will get you to that senior level. But then if you want to get up even further, you've got to cultivate those soft skills.
They call it a Peter's paradox, I think.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, like the idea that everyone's promoted to their highest level of incompetence.
Right.
You know, obviously it was written as a joke initially, but I think that if you stop learning, especially in this field, you know, if you stop developing these skills and you stop learning, then eventually you'll be promoted to a level where you can't perform, which can be really, really, you know, depressing to someone who, you know, if someone has like experienced a lot of success prior to that. So you're 100% right. Like everything I said about like what I look for in an interview, I only get to interview entry level candidates. So.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Because I wanted to not focus a ton on growing your career, because I think that most of the people who are watching this are there. Basically, Molly, you're the stand-in for the audience right now. Like, if we can get everyone who watches this podcast to have as smooth of a transition. So, Molly, how long have you been like working on this?
I think I filled out my first analytics word.
Application?
Yes, thank you so much. That's a simple one. 2 weeks ago. So this was actually a position that I didn't even apply for. I asked the recruiter to send me the job posting the morning before the interview. But it was interesting to hear you say how, you know, when you're interviewing candidates, you want to see like, how well can I teach you something? Because I think that was a fine line that I struggled with what should I put on my resume? What should I not? How do I sell myself, but not oversell myself? So that was reassuring to hear you say, because I know I was able to speak about Python. You know, it's not on my resume. I don't know anything. They asked me a question about pandas and I kind of just stuttered a little bit, like, I've read about them and I've used basic functions before, but I'm willing to learn, you know, that sort of thing. So
That's perfect.
It's very reassuring to hear you say that kind of thing, that, you know, it is entry level. They are trying to teach you. So.
And the fine line I wanted to like iterate is I interviewed this one candidate, right? And this candidate basically said, "Oh, I know Python." I'm like, "Okay, like let's get real now. So where's your GitHub?" And he's like, I don't have one." Totally fair. That does not mean he does not know Python. But then, especially with technical skills, it's really like in 30 seconds, I can determine whether you know the language or not, or whether you know Tableau or not, or whether you know Power BI or not, you know? And I totally get it. Not everyone will know every function. A engineer will know Python much more deeply than I know Python. But I think that one thing I would definitely tell candidates, do not say you can do something that you can't speak at least a little bit to, or be very specific about what you know. You know, I think that's where I heard a great, I don't want to call it a quote, but a great piece of advice. How do I talk about myself without bragging in an interview, for example? And one trick to doing that is being specific. I know how to use pandas inside Python to, you know, filter, clean, and aggregate data. I know how to use Python to web scrape data using Beautiful Soup, and I forgot what the other library was, a Selenium. Like by being specific, you're not bragging, and the interviewer now has a much better idea. Okay, how does this person fit into my what I'm looking for? Which is kind of what y'all were saying in the previous last week's podcast. You know, you have to give the interviewer ideas of like, okay, this person can fit in here, here, and here. So I would say, especially with new college graduates, I've seen this be a bit of an issue where they'll say they know something, and if I prod even a little bit, it's obvious that they don't. It doesn't mean it killed the interview, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, I don't expect a college graduate to know too much, ironically. But yeah, I would say
base level understanding of what's going on. But okay, I want to bring up the fighting video game metaphor once again. You brought up one of the cheat codes.
Would that be being specific about it, or?
Nope. Well, okay, that's another cheat code. That's a cheat code that I didn't create myself. Well, I guess, okay, I should say that we crowdsourced this cheat code on the podcast. You mentioned it earlier, well, like maybe 30 seconds ago, when he was talking about GitHub.
Okay. Having a portfolio, having something you can show people.
I would say that is the biggest cheat code you can have, which is something that I've been on Molly about, and she's just really let me down.
It was funny when it comes to a portfolio. I had told them that I don't have any Python projects, but then tried to sell myself by telling them that I was using DataQuest and explained to them that I got 3/4 of the way through the project, what I was doing, why I do not like that platform at all. Um, so
That communicates
yeah,
something. And
so cheat code, used half the cheat code. Can you do that?
but I have a story of how it works though. My brother, really smart guy, right? So he was almost in the exact same position I was in, where he like graduated he graduated as an industrial engineer. He's like, okay, I don't want to go work on a factory line. Nothing wrong with that. He just didn't want to. And then so he wanted to be a software engineer. And so what happens is he went to go interview with a company, and they were talking. They seemed to like him. And he's like, oh yeah, I did a couple of projects. I can do X, Y, Z using. I think he uses I forgot what language he uses, but it's not Python. It's something much more complex than that. It's like C++ or something. And he just like whips out his laptop. He's like, hey, check this out. And just like in the middle of the interview, like whipped out his laptop and just started showing it to the interviewer, and basically got the job instantly because of that.
Great.
I think it's really, and not just projects, right? Because I used to have a bunch of projects, but I think a project that you can like show in like 30 seconds is really key. How do you present this to someone? Yeah, I call it a cheat code for sure.
Also, too, this brings up an interesting topic I've been thinking about a lot, is this concept of leverage. The portfolio did the talking for him. And then it's basically a conduit for them to ask about, okay, well, why did you make this decision?
Yeah.
And you can say, well, I was thinking about, well, for example, okay, let's root down on like a Tableau project. It's like, well, why did you use a bar chart here? And it's like, well, I really think bar charts are a very effective way. They're not fancy, but they're an effective way of showing categorical analysis. So, I mean, it's a way, it's a conduit for you to kind of, like you said, you don't want to brag like, oh, I'm the best entry-level analyst that's ever been and ever will be. But saying like, yeah, I am thoughtful. I'm also proactive, and I have done things. Because I think that's what you can do with your portfolio is that you outsource your learning. So you put your piece of work out there, and then if you post it on Reddit or somewhere, people are going to have feedback for you. And I mean, sometimes it's harsh. I think usually most people online in the learning space are pretty supportive, but it gives you, they might ask a pointed question that will make you kind of double think, kind of like what we did with Hunter Brown when on the Danny Lauer episode. It's like he really was like, oh, I like these colors because they look cool. And it's like, yeah, but you're actually making this a less effective visualization because the color, like there's implied meaning with the color spectrum.
Right.
You don't want to just use that arbitrarily, but that's like such a good outsourced teachable moment that he learned based on the work that he did. And it kind of gets back to that like critical thinking ability too, or like making, maybe not critical thinking, but the way that you get to critical thinking in the classroom is putting out novel problems and then looking and reassessing and kind of taking an iterative approach.
And I think what you said about like being able to explain your decision making, if say you're interviewing for a job where they require Tableau or Power BI skills, right? Cheat code, read Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer, Knaflic. It is about that thick, not too long, but the book has a lot of tips on like color theory and like visual design theory and all these terms you can term drop. That can, again, it's a third, the interview is only at most maybe 2 hours long, and that's a very long interview for an entry level position. And in that time, if you can term drop, like for example, 7% of men are colorblind, are like red-green colorblind. So I don't use red and green in my charts together. I use blue and red instead, because that's like more inclusive of people who might be colorblind. Or for example, like horizontal bar charts are typically better than vertical bar charts because it is easier to look up and down and see the lengths of different bars. Or for example, we don't use pie charts because pie charts, human eyes are not tremendous, or the human brain is not great at processing volumes versus lengths of bars. Like we can look at lengths of stuff and be like, oh, this is longer than this thing. But if I showed, you've seen the optical illusion of like the really long, the thin, tall glass versus the really wide glass. And people always think the tall glass has a lot more water inside it. It's because humans we don't understand volume really well. These are all like bits of knowledge that you get out of that book that I literally use I use in an interview for Nordstrom, and it's a really good way to impress people very easily. Like, just like remember these factoids,
Well, it also just shows that you're thoughtful, that that what you're doing is not haphazard, is that it's pretty methodical, and there's a good amount of, like, I would say, cognitive energy put into the work that you're doing. Also too, okay, so I did want to touch on this. Molly, how much of what is your job currently? You now have the data science role. I know that this was quite a bit of a raise for you. So how much more money are you making now? You don't have to say in dollars and cents.
Right. I mean, it's almost a 40% increase in salary from where I am
That's
now,
huge.
like
That's
36,
huge.
37%.
It feels good to get those raises.
Oh my gosh, it feels like such a breakthrough. And that's part of what kind of motivated me to jump into the analytics space or the data space, is that I just felt like I was constantly making lateral move to lateral move to lateral move. So this feels great.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So me and Molly are, I mean, we've been friends since childhood. We were at dinner last week and she was so down about money. So this is huge.
Yeah.
Completely transparent. Once I got the job description, I cried a little bit before the interview. I said, there's no way. Well, why would anybody why would a recruiter even reach out to me about this? And so don't underestimate yourself. To all the
100%.
other listeners out there.
Because my brother brought out that profile project, he beat out someone with 5 years of experience, and he's entry level, like super entry level. I'm not saying that that's like what you should be expecting, talking to the audience right now. But yeah, no, don't sell yourself short. Even my first position was a position that required 3 years of experience. It's just there for ATSs, and because you need some kind of a standard for positions. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you're an entry level, right, don't be afraid to apply to those positions that say you need 3 years of experience. Generally saying you probably won't get the 5 years of experience positions. But yeah, 3 years of experience, you could probably do that, especially if you're, if you're out here listening to like podcasts on analytics and stuff, you can do it. If this is what you do on your free time, you could totally do it.
Molly, did you ever figure out how the recruiters found you? So I wish we could go back in time and talk to that Molly that was really sad at the bar and was just like, I can't. I'm so broke. I got rejected. You had one rejection and you were just like, well, this is my life. I'm just gonna have to accept this mediocrity.
That can be a little dramatic sometimes.
Well, so how did they find you? Was it because you're on the podcast?
No, I think they actually reached out to me. It was probably like ZipRecruiter or possibly even Indeed, where my resume was uploaded. I was kind of expecting where, LinkedIn or something like that. That's where I was putting all of my energy into. So that was kind of a curveball, but I know that they had asked about the podcast during the interview, so I was able to speak about it a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's right.
Tell me a little more about this.
You're doing the email marketing for us.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So here is this is a super high level pro tip. And I only know about this because I'm kind of involved in education boards around Greensboro. There is an analytics talent short supply demand differential. There's more of a demand than there is a supply in Greensboro, North Carolina. And that's pretty rare. And I think it's because people don't want to move to Greensboro because it's only 300,000. They want to go to Charlotte or Raleigh or wherever that's a cooler city. So I think that would kind of explain, or at least that's my theory as to why you have recruiters proactively reaching out to you to fill positions here locally.
Yeah. Was that a question? Sorry.
No,
So.
It was more of a theory.
Add on to that, actually, this position is actually based out of Austin, Texas. So it is a 100% remote position. And
Nice.
my boss
My-
lives in Mississippi. So,
So my theory is completely wrong.
but the second interview was based out of Greensboro, North Carolina. So I think
Okay.
you're right.
Well, and I think that depending on where you live, still, although I will say this, COVID has probably permanently shifted the way that work works.
Mhm.
Um, I keep Shashank.
There
I
you go.
keep saying it wrong. Shashank. I know that you have done some research for an upcoming video
Mhm.
about. You said Dallas, Texas.
So yeah, because it's where I work, it's where I have the most information, or it's where I used to work.
Okay, so I kind of wanted to segue the conversation into. So Molly, not only did you get a 40% raise year one,
Mhm.
you are now on a much higher earning trajectory in terms of career. And I think that I'm going to let you plug your upcoming video. So everybody go subscribe to his channel and watch this video because you're going to give us kind of like a high level view of salaries for, you said entry, is it entry, mid, and senior?
Yeah. So what I'm planning on doing is kind of giving you like, I keep being asked, what's the pathway to become a data analyst? I should be very clear. There's a billion different ways you can become a data analyst. I can tell you one. And that's kind of what I'm going to be communicating to people. And then giving some just basic salary bands for Dallas, Texas, because it changes so much depending on what city you go to. So Dallas, in my anecdotal experience and some research that I have done, is a relatively high paying city relative to cost of living versus, for example, say LA. Because I had applied to jobs in LA and they would give me a 10% raise on whatever I got in Dallas, which would just be eaten up by California state taxes. So, California, like I think the experience you get there will be absolutely tremendous, but money is something you have to be very concerned about over there because Dallas in many positions will pay you more than California, unless you get into a FANG company or I think they call it like Big N now. Like those companies will pay you insane salaries and give you stock and stuff, so that's something that a Dallas company is not going to do for you. But yeah, I guess I'll just go over like a quick overview, like what my YouTube channel is, and then talk about the bands to be more specific. So my YouTube channel, really quickly, it tells you, I have a course on Tableau, SQL, and Python for free, which are what I call the three pillars of being a data analyst. I'd say technical skills are, can you pull data? That's where SQL comes in. Can you manipulate data? That's where Python comes in. And can you present data? That's where Tableau comes in. And there's multiple ways to do this. You can do all of this stuff in Tableau, for example, actually. But these are just three, in the case of Tableau, widely used, or in the case of Python or SQL, open source tools that that basically every company uses, and can give you like skills that you could widely use in any large company.
Well, it's like that skill stack,
Yes.
Like I can pull it in this way because
Mhm.
I mean, if you know Tableau, that is a good skill. But if you can do it in multiple forms, because what if this company doesn't have Tableau or Power BI?
And the great thing about the Tableau is once you learn it, I didn't know Power BI until a client asked me a couple of weeks ago, like, hey, we use Power BI. And then based on the pricing structure, I'm like, hey, just stick with Power BI. It's a lot cheaper and it does the same thing. But I was able to learn it an evening because I knew Tableau. Like the basics are all the same, or it's easy to pick up once you know one of the things. So I have these free courses, if you learn those three things, and I focus specifically on how analysts use it, then you will be significantly more well positioned to get a job in analytics. I can't guarantee anything, but these are skills that people do value in the space. Going to your salary question, I think if you're applying for an entry-level data analyst role in the city of Dallas, Texas, and you can kind of use that to chart it to other parts in the United States, I'd say anywhere from 45 to 60 is what I'd say is a salary that you can expect for an entry-level role. Obviously, every company is different. There's so many caveats to this, but my experience with myself and my friends and other people I knew in the analytics space is you can expect that as an entry-level position. I'd say in the senior, you can go up to 80, maybe a little bit higher. And then once if you're able to prove to people that you can pull data from anywhere, you can create very complex analytical solutions, and you're an experienced senior, then 6 figures is not at all unreasonable. Especially if you work for a well-capitalized company like Capital One or something. like certain companies will pay you six figures for these kinds of, like if you know some SQL and you're able to manipulate data very well, you know Tableau very well. And if you can add Python to the mix and like really push in, and the reason I keep saying Python, right, is because it's a general purpose programming language. So it can do anything. Maybe not well, but it can do anything. And if once you start like talking about like, you know, putting in Python and you're able to advertise, hey, I can pull data from the internet using web scrapers. Hey, I can like create dashboards using Plotly, which is like, you know, it's a library in Python. I can create dashboards using Tableau. I know how to use Tableau Prep. I know how to use SQL. And I've used all of these things in this combination to derive this value from my previous company. You know, I think you could, I wouldn't say easily, but you can stretch to ask for six figures with less than 5 years of experience as a senior in Dallas.
Yeah, six figures would go a lot further in Greensboro than it would in Dallas. But I will say this, okay, from my experience, so it's weird in that, so I have an MBA with a concentration in analytics. So I think that's like a very, I don't know, is that a weird kind of specific, I think most people who are doing analytics work are not in that kind of vein.
It's weird in a good way. I don't know if you follow Scott Galloway, the NYU marketing professor.
No. Who's
Fascinating guy. You have to follow him. So he's an NYU marketing professor. He runs his own, he's kind of like you actually. He runs his own YouTube channel, podcast, everything. And he's gotten like pretty big. He has his own consulting firm and everything. And
sounds
he works
like me.
Yeah. So he's basically an older version of you. So he's like in his like early 60s, late 50s. And I highly recommend following him because he has a lot of great advice. And he says, there's a video, he says like, I'll teach you how to become rich. And he's very much like, I cannot teach you how to become rich quickly. No one really can do that. I can teach you how to become rich slowly. And the way you do that is low spending, high earning. How do you become high earning? Combine two different skills that typically don't work together or typically aren't seen together. That gives you a niche that you can really hammer home with either with a company or with a consulting gig, where you go to companies and say, hey, like I am a very business savvy MBA educated guy, but I also know how analytics works, you know? So you want two different skills that don't necessarily go together.
Yeah, he's speaking about my life, it sounds like.
Yeah. And he says it's like basically guaranteed to become rich slowly, which is, you know, and like, that doesn't sound good, right? But no, becoming rich slowly is like the only reliable way to become, you know, wealthy. No one can tell you how to become rich quick, reliably.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you have to get extremely lucky for it to just all fall into place.
Right.
Because I mean, there's timing. There's like, are you even in the right market or even in the right space? Yeah, that's cool. I didn't realize that there was someone else. What was his name again?
Scott Galloway. I highly recommend him.
Galloway.
I read his book on post-coronavirus. So he has like all these like thoughts he puts together, and that's some of them might be a little bit controversial for the podcast. So I definitely recommend people just go check him out separately. But yeah, he's a professor at NYU Stern.
Okay, that's cool. Cool. Well, I think that we're pretty much wrapping. Oh, the point I wanted to get kind of talking about the salary is that, Molly, if you are learning these skills, like, I'm so happy for you. Like, you've got the title, and now the fact that you have this job is going to make you learning these new skills. I wouldn't say it's easier. It's going to be easier for you because it's either ride or die. Like, you're going to learn Python or you're going to find a new job, and maybe you'll have to get back to what you were doing before, which I don't think you want to do that.
No, I don't think so. They pay for continuing education, so
Nice.
Perfect.
hopefully Python will
But
be
yeah, I mean, I have that Python course that'll teach you just like the stuff that you need for analytics specifically. Because I took when I started to learn Python, I took a course for engineers. Great course, but engineers need a very different set of libraries in Python than analysts and data scientists need. So that's kind of like that's where I saw myself adding value. Like, here's like, forget about all this, even like classes, for example, in Python. Not at all saying you shouldn't learn them. I have not used them at all for a lot of my like beginning work. Now I'm starting to use them a little bit more, but like you can go a long time without using it.
Yeah, I'm super interested in checking that out because, you know, familiarity with the syntax, but not necessarily the application purpose. And that's kind of how I left it in the interview. So I will for sure be watching your videos.
And by the time this class comes out, I'll have a SQL course out too. So, or by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have a SQL course on my channel too.
Perfect. Awesome.
Actually, this is making me think about the nature of learning on the job, which is very different than in the classroom. So how do you typically go about learning when you're out in the working place? Maybe it's different than how I've done it.
Were you asking me or Molly?
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, okay, it's a bit of a controversial tactic. I will spend both working time and time outside of work learning a skill. So I guess, let me back it up a little bit.
Okay.
First and foremost, I do my absolute best to convince my manager that this is a useful thing. This will be good for the company. Always talk about how it's going to be good for the company. If I know how to do X, Y, Z, if you can attach dollars and cents to it, like last week's podcast y'all were talking about, that's even better. If you can't do that, then any like moment you can find to like attach a solution to a problem, I would recommend doing that, even if it's not necessarily the fastest thing out there. It helps you develop much faster, and you can then implement that in a solution and then show people like, hey, look, like I did this thing and it works. And I would recommend, if possible, finding people who are particularly skilled in that thing. So for example, engineers, right? So like any ETL job, extracting, transform, loading data that I have, I like will take it to an engineer and I'll be like, hey, here's like my solution. I didn't ask anyone to like develop it, but like, here's how it works. And they'll usually tell me, here's how you could have done stuff better. Engineers love laughing at analyst code because it's like kind of like all haphazard and everything. So like, we'll have code reviews where engineers will just like laugh at my code and, have a great time at my expense. So sorry, that was a little bit all over the place. Get buy-in from your manager, speak to people who are more skilled than you are in the thing you're trying to learn, and implement solutions you've already implemented in your new solution. So for example, like I used to do stuff in Alteryx, but then I'd recreate that same process in Python. And then I go tell my boss, I'm like, hey, yo, take my Alteryx license away. I can make all the stuff in Python and it's free, I think a really skilled person would actually leverage that into a raise, but I didn't do that.
Right. Be like, okay, yeah, here's 8,000 for the license. Let's go away with it.
Yeah.
I want 3,000 of that.
Right.
My salary. But kind of what I was getting at with this line of questioning or thinking is that the way that you learn analytics on the job is kind of haphazard and piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a college class where it's like, okay, we're going through the high level. Here are the 4 main fundamentals. And then you go through, it's like, man, I feel like I am really leaning on my video game references today, but
it's a good metaphor.
Well, okay, the metaphor it's not the final one. This one is, those world building games where it's like you start off with your castle and then the map is all blacked out except for your castle, and then
I'm a huge civilization nerd, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the metaphor for how you typically learn analytics skills. It's like, because you can go back to your castle but you've got this like little village right here that you've seen, and then you go out this way, but it's almost like, no, I'm not going to get on that. That was too many metaphors on top of metaphors. It's like you start with that one central point. Okay, I'm an analyst. Then you might learn, okay, well, let's learn a little bit about visualization theory. And it's like, you just need this one thing visualized. Okay, let's learn about the business. And then you slowly kind of start to build it out, and it's this iterative process. It's not like, okay, chapter 1 of the book, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, which is what I'm excited to see Molly develop, like with these data science skills. And it's funny because she's soon going to be more technical than me. I kind of know what syntax means, like, but not really. Like you're already starting to get like beyond my technical acumen. I think you've probably heard me say this. I'm more of like a management / business person with like a little bit of analytics sprinkled in, to where I'm a little intimidated. We have a data scientist on the call now.
That title's a really big deal.
Yeah. I mean, I've been shaking in my boots. Well, actually, so we've got someone from Nordstrom, we've got a data scientist, and we've got someone from Google on the call. It's really weird. All the heavy hitters. So, Albert, you want to come take over, do the Q&A?
I can indeed, yeah. So I was just multitasking with call with Google, so I kind of bird dogging on that one. It's not a required meeting for me. Shashank, how's it going, man?
It's going really well. I love the way you moderate and keep these podcasts, up and coming. I love your wallpaper too.
Awesome. Yeah, that was kind of a mistake. I think it was just one where I looked at kind of how the window looked. I was like, well, that looks like crap. It was something ironically enough, that was a background I put on a LinkedIn page I put together for my unit, and then took down later, but still had the picture. So, yeah,
I dig it.
multitasking, multipurposing. So we have 4 questions today. One video question, and it's a techie question. So I hope you enjoy this one.
Ooh, I love these types.
Hello, Mr. Kalanithi. I saw that you recently, and I hope I didn't mess up your name. I'm terribly sorry if I did. I was on YouTube and I saw you came out with a video about Notion APIs talking with Discord bots. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to come out with a video about bank APIs communicating with Quant Connect auto trading scripts. If so, when do you think you'll come out with the video? And if not, do you think the principles that you covered with the Notion API communicating with the Discord bot could be applied to the auto trading idea? Thank you and have a good podcast.
All right.
Hello, Mr. Keller.
Interesting question. Okay. So to give everyone some background, I created so I'm a huge Notion user. So Notion's like, it is a workspace organization app, of which its major function is like note taking, but there's so much more that you can do with it. They recently came out with a public API that they've been, talking about for years, but it's finally out. What an API is, it's an application programming interface. What it does is it, someone builds an application over here, right? An API allows you to send a command in and get an output out. You have no idea how the API necessarily does all of its logic, but it's a way for app developers, in this case Notion, to allow their more technical users to advance or to interface with their application without giving them full access to it. So for example, and I highly recommend learning APIs if you're looking to get into the data science and analytics space, because a lot of my clients, I've been able to derive tremendous value for them by working with the Google Maps API or the Bing Maps API. Basically Google Maps, I can create optimize trucking networks and stuff like that by using Bing Maps routing API and stuff like that. But to get back to his question, would I make a video on that? I think that would be pretty interesting. I have always wanted to make a trading bot, not with any intention of actually making money. I don't think I could make money doing that. But it would be fun to just throw $100,000 into a trading bot to see what it does. Yeah, I guess I could make a video, maybe not specifically with Quant Connect, but just whatever I decide to use with it. You totally can. Long story short, Python should be able to interact with any API that exists out there because they should all have the ability to accept post and get requests, which is just one way of sending and receiving a command from an API. So long story short, it should be possible. Not the highest priority right now, but yeah, I mean, I'm glad that someone's interested in knowing about that.
Yeah. So Seth's kind of bored. I think he spent months building a video game, as far as I could tell, from scratch, and
Wow.
really documented it quite meticulously. I think some of it on YouTube, but I saw most of it on LinkedIn. But yeah, once he got done with that, he was suffering some brain cramps. He took a week or two off, and now I think he's kind of back at it, looking for his next project. So.
That's exciting. Yeah, you definitely have to connect me with him.
Yeah, absolutely. So we next question is kind of a tag team question. So Pooja Chavan gave us a couple of questions. She's a big fan of the show, and this first one is chimed in by Sushrita Gade as well. And they wanted to know, what challenges did you face in the technical transition going from chemistry into IT and then on into analytics?
So yeah, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, when I was in IT, I didn't really do anything. So I was basically being paid to sit in a room and be quiet. So I can barely call that an internship. But I would say the struggle that I had was funny story. So for those of you that mess around with data, you'll know joins are when you take two data sets, tabular data sets, and combine them horizontally, right? So I didn't know that like you could like duplicate records by joining on like only one key. So I did this thing where like I duplicated something like 1 billion times, like literally 1 billion times. And me and my old boss, we're you know, we're good friends. We still joke around about, oh, remember when you did that MCU to MCU join? MCU being the JD Edwards code for like a business unit, I think. So I would say the challenges were, the biggest challenge was probably just learning or just sitting down in front of a computer for 4 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day. There is this great video I watched on YouTube once where this guy says, I have like, here's one tip that'll teach you how to code. And like, it applies to a lot of analytics stuff too. You have to be willing to sit down for 8 hours a day in front of a computer and do nothing else. And I think that is true. Like you see a lot of these apps on the iPhone and on Android, they'll say like, oh, learn how to program by like, you know, for 5 minutes a day. I don't believe that works personally. I'm going to go out on a limb there and just say like, that does not work. You have to be willing to spend, maybe not 8 hours, but you have to be willing to spend like 2 hours at a time, you know, just like sitting in front of the computer and forcing yourself to watch classes, try something out, fail more than you succeed until you eventually succeed more than you fail. And that was probably the biggest struggle, just sitting in front of the computer. Because I think that's a great technique, or it's a great piece of advice. If you want to learn a technical skill, how long are you willing to sit down? That's the trick right there.
Okay, I'm going to push back on you a little bit because I think it depends. That's your learning style. I think that that's like your mindset. And I think that you and I are both like super type A. I worry a little bit that that's going to like intimidate or scare people off. Because I think that is like a very aggressive approach. And I understand the thinking, and that's essentially how I built my consulting agency, is that I basically worked 7 days a week for 3 years to get everything up and running. We had someone on the podcast, D'Angelo, who runs a YouTube channel as well. He's taken a much more laid back, longer, like where I got in 3 years, it probably took him, I don't know, 6 or 7. But he's just like, I want to learn. I want to, in my free time, like I like dancing. I like doing X, Y, and Z. I think you and I are very much like, it's almost like an obsession. Like I was like, I'm going to establish myself as the analytics expert in this area. And it's like everything got kind of focused on that. I think that I agree that is an effective way, but I'm not sure I would like, I don't know. People watching, do not be like, oh, yeah, I can't sit down for 8 hours. So.
And I should apologize. I think I got a little bit excited over there. But you're 100% right. That is my learning style. I will argue that you do need to be willing to sit down for like 2 hour increments. Like that, I'm pretty certain on. Like, especially if you have I mean, the school's the same way, right? Like, you know, you don't learn anything in school by spending like 20 minutes on a task, right? You have to like sit down, read the textbook, reread it to make sure you understand it. So yeah, maybe 8 hours is a bit of an is not necessary, but I would say you have to be willing to sit for an extended period of time. It can't be like 5 minutes on my phone, I'm gonna like look at some Python. It's
right.
Like, no, yeah.
I think that's valid.
Right.
Like kind of reflecting back on like what we talked about this podcast, I think you're a pretty unique dude in that you got a degree in something that you hated. And I mean, most people would just drop out. So it's like your level of gumption and like, I'm going to stick with this and push through. I think you're probably in the top like 1% of people in terms of like, I don't know, work ethic, productivity, like focus. Because I relate. Well, I don't know. I probably would have dropped out. Hearing you talk about a chemistry degree, I think I would have dropped out of college. Or actually, I probably just would have pivoted into something. I mean, I got an undergraduate degree in economics, which is interesting to me. You know, like I found it kind of fun, and the theory was like, oh, this is interesting.
And I would say there's a downside to the personality type I have too. Like the gumption can make you very boneheaded. Again, 4 years, and you know, I'll let people go look up tuition at Emory. That much money spent getting a degree I hated. I would say that's a major criticism of my method. I should have pivoted into something I found more interesting. But you know, the past is the past. Stuff happens.
Man, I feel like we're birds of a feather. I mean, the amount of like mental turmoil I went through, like I haven't really opened up too much about it. I mean, there were times where like I was like, I am completely tapped out in terms of maxed out on my credit cards, and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent this month. I mean, I've gotten through that time period, but there's there's trade-offs. Like I learned a huge amount of time. Like if you go back, I don't know if you listened to Gary Fly podcast episode, he was putting me in pitch meetings with like presidents of companies, and it's like I knew 80% of what I was talking about, and I felt like I shouldn't even be in the room. But I mean, that made me work so hard to get prepped for that.
Right.
So I think that we probably thrive in that environment. And now I've got like a week or two of downtime before we get into this new house. I'm like, what do I do? How do I fill these days?
I get bored if I'm like not doing anything for like 45 minutes. That's when I'm just like, oh my God, like, you know, like my life is going nowhere. I'm going to end up like, you know, on the streets. It's very traumatic.
Yeah. So we're just running as fast as we can just to edge off that existential dread.
Right. But yeah, 2 hours. I will stick by that number.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Wait, and I think that's consistent with, you know, like Genji with 66 days. And then Danny Ma's doing 8 weeks of SQL now. It's, you know, they say, hey, 5 minutes a day. Really what it is, they know for a fact, nobody's going to sit down, start studying SQL, and 5 minutes later say, whoop, time's up, and get up and move on. I mean, so 5 minutes is to convince you, hey, it's not a big time investment. Let me just start this. Once you get into it, you're going to finish the class or the segment or the lesson that you're on. Before you know it, it's half an hour or an hour. Now you've actually accomplished something.
And it's an S curve too. When you hit like this point, it's self-motivating. Like it's depressing, that like first part of it, when you're not learning anything, or sorry, when you know so little that you can implement nothing. That part's really depressing. But once you hit that S curve, now I used to hate coding when I was in like college and everything. Now I love it. Because you know, you are able to do stuff with it. You see your progress, you know? So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
So Pooja also was asking, I know you've touched on this fairly extensively, but she wanted to know if you were more self-learning data analyst or if you used a mentor. I know you're definitely primarily an autodidact, but did you find mentors along the way to help you and kind of give you a path?
So I would say my first boss was a tremendous mentor for me. And he's the one that kind of like, I would say like of everything I know today about corporate America, a good 60% of it's just like from him. Really, really smart guy. That being said, now our relationship's a lot more, like, you know, in that race to like get better, our relationships become a lot more equal now. And, you know, I still learn a lot of stuff from him, but it's less of him like passing down knowledge from the mountain to me. But yeah, I think I would definitely recommend having a mentor. Right now, I kind of go to the data scientists at Nordstrom. So that's one of the reasons I came to Nordstrom, because there is a very large data science implementation here. And I go to the data scientists and I go to them with very pointed questions. Like one of them is like an expert at R, for example. I'm trying to learn R. That way I have Python and I'm dangerous with R. And I ask her, you know, any questions that I have. I ask people for their code all the time. So I wouldn't say I have a formal mentor, but I know people who are significantly better than me at like XYZ things. And I ask them for their code. I ask them for their work. And I like just start dissecting it, looking at it. And I say like, okay, I tried this weekend, it didn't work. And then she's like, Shashank, you know, you need to be using tidyverse with R. Yeah, I would say if you can find a single mentor, that'd be awesome. I haven't found one yet. But if not, you can always like just ask individuals that know more in certain sections than you do.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's, you know, that can be difficult because everyone's multifaceted. I mean, you know, even professionally, are you really going to find someone out there that has walked the exact path that reflects all of your goals, with the unique skill sets that are out there, the platforms, the languages? I feel like you probably need a team of people that you can go to, which is why it's super cool that you found that at Nordstrom. So last question is from Diane Johnson, and I'm gonna word this a little carefully. So she asked, how could someone who's a little older entering the field of analytics differentiate themselves from younger candidates? I know that you are not old by any stretch, and neither is Diane, I will say, but she is a mid-career pivot. So if you're not following the traditional bachelor's degree in analytics or data science or some sort of technical field, computer science, let's say, you've got a chemistry degree, and then you come in, do you think there's a best practice for coming in and saying, I'm here and I know what I'm doing, even though my degree is not necessarily in the tech field you want?
So I think, and I'm not calling John old at all, but doing kind of like what John did, where he like has the MBA, but then like knows a lot about analytics and can implement stuff in Tableau. I think that's a tremendous way of going about it. So for example, like I'd ask her, do you want to learn Python? Do you want to learn SQL? If you don't want to, that's totally fine. I would say in that case, go pick up like a tool like Tableau or something. Because you can learn, I think you can learn enough of Tableau in about a week of, let's say you put in an hour a day. You can learn a decent amount about Tableau in that amount of time. And make a couple of dashboards in Tableau, right? And I think that just doing that will give you enough knowledge of how data works, how do joins work, how do unions work, how do you, like, what is a SQL database? What is a database? Like these are the types of questions that, say I was going to hire someone for any kind of analytics position, I would expect them to know the answers to these. They don't have to know Python, they don't have to know SQL. But the great thing about a tool like Tableau or Power BI is that because it's such a data-centric tool, just using that and learning that, you will learn so much about the data space and how these concepts work. Because I would say, like, if she's mid-career, do not let go of all the progress you've already made. Leverage, like, add analytics on top of your progress and leverage that to, do better and better in your job. Unless you hate your job, I guess that's a bit of a different question.
True. All right, Shashank, well done. John David, that's what our super fans have for you this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Where's the best way for people to find you? On LinkedIn and YouTube?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, I'd say. If you could subscribe to my YouTube channel, that'd be awesome. I keep putting out content to try and teach people how to get into the analytics field from a technical perspective. It's not the only important thing out there. It's just the angle that I'm teaching. So yeah, I think YouTube and LinkedIn would be good ways to contact me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And congratulations, Molly.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.